Hey everyone, my name is Peter.
Hey, Chris's students.
Hi, this is Pat Cameron.
My name is Mike Benoit.
My name is Adam Rapp.
I'm Jackson DeGiacomo.
This is David Wysocki.
My name's Brittany.
Hey there.
Hi, everyone.
How's it going, guys? I'm Zach Bellis, and I played Johnny in The Outsiders.
It can be very difficult to tap into extreme emotions as an actor. What I really like to focus on is the circumstance in which Soda Pop finds himself in. So, for example, he has a lot of care and concern for his baby brother Pony, who he has to watch go through a lot of trouble and a lot of turmoil. So that kind of helped me tap into that emotional extreme. Another aspect of the story that Soda, draws a lot of emotion from is his breakup with Sandy. And in that scene, it was really important for me to focus on making her stay. That was my objective. That was my goal, to get Sandy to stay with me and not go to Florida. And unfortunately, she doesn't choose that route. She feels that she needs to move to Florida and get out of there, which was, as you saw, pretty heartbreaking for Soda.
So I think for me, the biggest struggle in this show was trying to get into the point of view of Marcia. I was 16 a number of years ago, but what helped me was to kind of try and access those memories, those feelings that I had when I was a 16-year-old, and tune them into Marcia's situation, what she wants, what she needs, how can she get it, and being able to kind of put myself back into the mindset of a 16-year-old and the urgency of everything that I want, and using it in the scenes such as the drive-in, and especially when she comes back and talks to Ponyboy and sees Two-Bit, just kind of what is driving her in those scenes. I tried to think of what would drive me when I was 16 years old. And actually, the accent and my costumes all helped me become Marcia more. Because once I put on the costume and I used the accent, it helped me to embody Marcia, and the thoughts came more easily.
Well, I have a pretty long commute to theater reviews. It takes me about 30 to 40 minutes to drive to the theater each morning. So as a warm-up to get into character, I started dropping into my southern accent a little bit, so I'd be ready to go when I got to the theater. And then I also usually park a fair distance away from the theater, so I like to drop into my distinct social walk. The Socias have a very distinct walking style. It's full of a lot of swagger, and I like to practice walking in that way before I got into the theater. I only got one weird look the entire time we did the show.
Actually, Chris told us to watch me and the other Socias, the original Karate Kid, and watch specifically the Cobra Kai and how they treat Daniel. They're super, super aggressive and just over the top angry at the world, I guess. Has a lot to do with kind of the same things that the Socias are dealing with, their upbringing and kind of having a lot of things handed to them and not a lot of people saying no. There's a line actually in, I think Randy has it in the play. He says, the only person that ever said no to Bob was Cherry. That's why he liked her so much. And Randy tells the story about how he was expecting his parents to raise the roof over him coming home drunk the one time, and they didn't. That little speech of his kind of shed a lot of light onto Bob for me. And then using kind of the character, using like the attitude of the Cobra Kai and the way they carry themselves, in conjunction with that kind of information about Bob himself specifically, helped me kind of
decide who Bob is and how he would act in these situations where he's with his friends and they're beating up on a kid that's at least 3 years younger than him. I mean, they're juniors or seniors in high school, and Ponyboy is a freshman, I think. He just turned 14, so yeah. That helped a lot once I started to really get into that and just taking those behaviors and finding how they would fit into Bob's personality.
I think the biggest thing is to just not think about it as anger, is that, you know, to really just focus on what the character wants. And, you know, like, we don't often intend to be angry. We just intend to get someone to see a point. And the fact that Ponyboy just brushes me off and doesn't look, I mean, even just, you know, looking at him as an actor, like, he would turn away from me, and that just makes you get louder and more aggressive. And it's sort of by focusing on the intention of what you're trying to play that you eventually end up at angry, but that's not what you actually go out to do.
I became an actor in 6th grade. My first play was at the Theater of Youth. Being there, I have a lot of responsibility to take, especially with school. My school personally lets me take off a lot of time during school time, performances, everything. But because of that, I have to make up a lot of work and all the classes I missed. So when I get home, maybe at like 12 from a school time performance, from 12 to 3, I'll just do all my homework and get it out of the way. Then from there, I even have an extra little time to talk to my friends maybe. And at 6, I'll eat, and then after I eat, I'll study my script and go over my character even more. And then how to get into my character, seeing other characters or other great actors portraying that character really helps me get into it. And even the set, even seeing the set is just amazing. Like with even the contrast in the spray paint for the outsiders makes me really feel more as like it's a hard time in life. So yeah, that's how I get into the character, and that's how it is for me for being a teen actor and how I manage my time.
Being an actor is the most unique career you could ever choose. It's the most hands-on career you could ever choose. It's super fun. It's so unique. You get to reinvent yourself every single day, every single part. Part of the responsibility of being an artist is to constantly be learning and adjusting your point of view, trying to find new things that challenge you. Just because you always want to become the most well-rounded person, the most well-rounded tool to be used for, you know, any show or any situation you're in. That's the biggest part of being an actor, is never thinking the work is done and always thinking that there's more that you can do. There's something, deeper. You got to go deeper. You got to go deeper. And if you have the want and the need to do that, then this is definitely the career for you.
Ponyboy has a really big emotional story to tell on stage, so there was definitely a lot that went into backing that up and doing the research behind that. I watched the movie, I read the book, I went through my entire script and made a lot of notes on where I felt the character was emotionally. But most importantly, I had so many conversations with Chris during the rehearsal process about where he felt Ponyboy was emotionally, where I felt Ponyboy was emotionally, and what he felt, and we both felt the character needed to showcase at that moment, what he felt I needed to bring out of Ponyboy in order to tell the right story. So yeah, really great question. A lot of things went into it, but yeah, most importantly, those heart-to-heart conversations with the director.
I think that's one of my favorite things about working with Mr. Kelly as a director. He kind of allows his actors room to play and try different things on their feet. So any kind of like physicality stuff was improvised and created throughout the rehearsal process. You know, the lines are given to us in the script, so we can't necessarily improvise on that end of things for the most part. But as far as movement and how I can show who this character is, that you kind of have some liberty to play around with. So for me, I found it really helpful to have, these old beaten up Converse sneakers that I would put on, and that just this old beaten up leather jacket. As soon as I had my costume on, I was feeling like, oh, okay, now I kind of have a feel for who Soda is and how he moves. And then I, was given a comb, and all of a sudden I'm combing my hair, and I'm feeling like Soda Pop. So.
Johnny was an emotional character because of his situation, but also who he was. As you see, somebody went through a similar situation as him in Dallas, and Dallas is not a very emotional character. He's much more mercurial in terms of explosiveness. Johnny still has that vulnerability, that sadness, that need to express. And that was easy for me to connect with. I thought that it was beautiful that even through all this pain, he was still willing to be open and willing to push and be in the moment. So what I did personally is I connected a lot with the character. We did a lot of work. We practiced a lot, also known as rehearsal. And I mean, we were there 6 days a week for 5 straight weeks. And I was pretty much there every day from the start of the day till the end of the day. And so through the process of understanding who Johnny was and putting myself in those shoes, and then practicing and driving deeper and deeper and creating a deeper well of what all of the trauma they've been through was like inside, it was much easier then to experience it. So what you saw, the reason why you saw it as very real, is because I was feeling those moments in that moment. It wasn't just play acting. It wasn't just me, even though the word acting is in it. It wasn't me just trying to fabricate a experience. My job is to feel those moments and then communicate them to you, pardon me, appropriately.
First and foremost, I want to say every single boy in this production was nothing but respectful. I mean this truthfully, because there are times where I do, and there are times where it does happen where you feel uncomfortable and you may have to say something to your fellow castmates and or to your stage manager or your director, where things happen and you're like, that made me feel super uncomfortable, because sometimes things that happen in this script can bleed over, and that's unprofessional and that shouldn't happen. And so first and foremost, when we weren't when we weren't performing this scene, always every man, and that being one of the only 3 women in the show, was something I was absolutely worried about. I was like, it's me and 2 girls who are younger than me, and I don't want the boys to bully us. And they didn't. I mean, I would never let them, but they didn't. And so I want to say every single boy was so respectful and just honestly just a joy to work with. I was just coming in with my coworkers, doing our job and walking away from it. And that is all an actor can ever ask for.
Another thing that people wonder is, how did me and Brendan develop our characters' relationships with one another? And it was just a bunch of communication. We definitely communicated all the time what we were comfortable with, what we weren't comfortable with, how we respond to one another, what wouldn't we do, what would we do in certain situations. Because as Sandy in Act 1, she's obviously so headstrong and in love with Soda Pop. Sorry, I just blanked. And in Act 2, you just see the shift change. So you have to know how that character is going to react in each scenario.
Of course, at first when you do scenes like, you know, it was just so interesting because Cherry was the first one who'd say, like, why you blushing? Like, she was the first one to say that. So she's definitely a flirtatious person and enjoys having fun. But again, I think that was something that enamored her with Ponyboy and Johnny, was that they really didn't hit on her, that they really were just trying to get to know her as a person, as a friend. And that made her be like, hey, I really want to talk to them and get to know them.
So I think, again, with a lot of communication, talking about what makes us comfortable, what doesn't, and what makes sense to the play, that was definitely one way that we developed our character. And also another way was just like learning to be cool and just comfortable with one another. So yeah.
We've actually been in a show together before, a show directed by Chris, by Mr. Kelly, Significant Other, a couple years ago. So fortunately, Zach and I came into this production already having been friends. So that was really, that put us a step ahead. Also backstage, we had a lot of heart-to-heart conversations. We opened up. He talked about his life. I talked about my life. We joked around a lot. We just did things, you know, that friends do backstage. So we got to goof around a lot and start becoming comfortable with each other, but also start becoming a little bit more emotionally vulnerable with each other, so that it was a little easier on stage. And every rehearsal before we started working, when we'd see each other, we'd give each other a big hug. And it just made us feel a little bit more like brothers before going on stage and acting.
And I'm not the most seasoned stage combatant. It's not something I've done a lot of in the past. It's a ton of fun. I just don't have a lot of experience with it, and a lot of the guys in that show do. So it was kind of a combination of learning quickly, doing what I was told, kind of staying out of the way. Because they need space, they need to be able to visualize things and try and do things.
In a theatrical production, as you may know, we have a fight choreographer who is in charge of making sure the combat is safe, but also a great spectacle, typically. So in this case, we had a really wonderful choreographer who I've worked with several times before, named Steve Vaughn, and he's a professional director and choreographer in the Buffalo, Niagara area. So for him, his job is to essentially work alongside Chris and decide whether or not, what kind of story do they want to tell throughout the fights that happen in the show. So perfect example of this, of course, is the big rumble that happens. And so there are many different ways one could theoretically, take care of that fight. But to tell the same story as the director is telling is a communication, is a matter of communication that happens between the two of them. Excuse me. And it's Steve's job to essentially present and with his choreography get the levels that he wants and focus from the combat.
In addition to doing the fighting, I also, in other productions, work as a choreographer. And when I teach it and when I choreograph, one of the first things I always try to remind people is that stage fighting has more in common with a dance than it does with fighting. And that's always the big thing, is that, there are, the same way like you learn dance choreography for 42nd Street, fight choreography, we learn the moves, we go over them, we rehearse them. When something goes wrong, we start over, we do it again.
Whenever I'm doing a choreographed fight with someone, I need to be always attentive to making them look good first and foremost, and to making sure that I don't injure them or I don't hurt them in any way throughout the rehearsals. And there will be some mishaps, but it's sort of breaking it down chunk by chunk for a fight sequence.
Each scene had its own challenge.
I actually found any scene where we had to be injuring or jumping Ponyboy to be really difficult because nobody likes to injure Peter. He's a super nice actor. In particular, the drowning scene I found very difficult to do each time. I would always have to check in with Peter and make sure he was okay with what we were doing, both before the scene and after the scene.
Like the opening scene where it's the haircut. We cut Pony's hair. That was the first time I'd ever used like a blade or any weapon on stage. That was a little nerve-wracking at first because it is a real knife. It's dulled, but like it can still hurt somebody.
You're going to find yourself getting emotional when you're doing a scene, and especially in combat because there's a lot of stuff going on. But you can't allow that to change your combat, because if you do, you can put lives in jeopardy. So if I'm supposed to do a punch and I punch somebody across, and I'm supposed to take only one step forward afterwards, that's what I do. I mean, yes, if I'm acting, I can make it large and big, but when I'm doing the action itself for the combat, I'm still doing the same calculated motion, hopefully, every time. So that way there's a sense of trust between myself and my partner. They know I'm going to do the same thing every time.
It requires a lot of concentration and choreography and energy and breath, and it's just a lot of things happening at once, and it's so fun, and you want to get carried away in it a lot of times, but you have to be in control, and that's like a really, really hard thing to do when you're having fun.
Even once you put the choreography together, that's when you step back and you watch it and you start realizing, you're like, oh, that one sequence is going directly in front of the other one, and now we can't see the important one. And so you change it. And there's a lot of stopping and starting, and in all reality, we probably spent about a quarter of the entire rehearsal process working on all the fights in that show.
I know that part of the rehearsal process is breaking it down beat by beat. So that's always a relief for me, and but that's what makes the experience more enjoyable for me as an actor.
So I played Marcia and Mrs. O'Brien, and playing two characters in the show wasn't exactly challenging because Marcia is a young girl and Mrs. O'Brien is an adult, so the characters themselves were very different. But the one time it was a little difficult was when I had to change from Mrs. O'Brien back into Marcia in Act 2 after the ambulance scene. That was just hard because the change was a little quick. So I had to change clothes super fast and also make sure that I was refocusing back into the mindset of Marcia and what she wanted and what she needed from the scene she was about to do, on top of changing all my clothes and jewelry and everything. But that was, I would say, the biggest challenge for me playing two characters. Other than that, it was super cool because the show, which is more serious, had a lot of serious characters. So I got to play Marcia, who was lighthearted and fun, and I like to think saw the good in everybody. And I also got to play a more serious character, Mrs. O'Brien, who was at the fire and who was helping Ponyboy and who was, scared for her children. So I got to embody all of those different feelings and emotions, which is awesome. And it's everything an actor wants.
I find that it's helpful to ground oneself in the scene somehow. Whether that's a piece of physicality, like the way you move something of your body, and just finding that's like kind of helps you ground you in your character. That helps to some people. Sometimes a prop or a costume really helps. For example, not that this really did it for me, but one thing that does help to a small degree was having that doctor's coat, the surgeon's coat, helped me immediately get into that mentality instead of being in the very much of the socialist costume, and having a completely different attire helps to really get into it.
I always get excited to play more characters because it offers up the opportunity for me as a performer to apply my skills and my talents into finding the two differences between these two characters and when I'm going to present on stage. Whether it's for a short period of time or it's going to be throughout the play, there's always an excitement I get from more work and more discoveries. I've written a bio for mainly Paul because he's the one I'm on stage with the most, but and I had that in my mindset. But when discovering Jerry, it was a bit different because he was only on stage for a short period, but there's still more of an emotional and physical investment that was needed and required.
It was really, 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 really cool playing two characters. I think one of the most challenging parts about it was trying to figure out the imaginary circumstances and figuring out what really sets each character apart from one another. At times it could be extremely challenging, but other times it was just, everything seemed to just gel well, and it was just really fun, especially playing alongside all the other actors and feeding off of everybody's energy. Everything just seemed to mesh well together. So it was challenging but fun at the same time.
That's a great question. Something that Chris actually asked me and Peter, who played Ponyboy, a couple times, because it's they have a strange relationship where she becomes so enamored with him. And I think Cherry is just enamored with, for lack of a better term, like the other side of the tracks, the life that she doesn't know, the grass is always greener, that kind of thing. And I think she's also enamored by the humanity that the boys show each other. She doesn't really see that with Bob and Randy. She's surprised by seeing boys apologize to each other and being nice. Even though they have their own rough and tough way with each other, they're being genuine with each other. And that's not something that I played as Cherry, not really seeing in the boys that she surrounds herself with all the time. So definitely things get astronomically more complicated after Bob dies. But I think that there definitely is some sort of connection between Ponyboy and Cherry. One of those things where she's just a little bit older, so maybe it doesn't work out in high school, maybe it does in the future, but it's basically just two people who really understand each other. And sometimes you find that in people from other sides of the world, or from people on the other side of the city, or someone who lives in your neighborhood but maybe doesn't go to your school, where it's like that person just gets me. Whether or not there's some sort of romantic relationship there, that person understands me. So I think that they were in such a tumultuous place that we really can't say, but there's obviously a connection where the two of them understand each other.
I think it's a combination of a few things. First of all, the Rumble is very physically taxing.
Which is when you see the Greasers and the Socias fighting on stage, that huge fight we do in Act 2, going from that directly into the hospital scene where Johnny is dying.
And essentially you just had a massive fight not 2 minutes ago, and then you have to have this super emotional scene.
And particularly this death on stage, I mean, with it being Johnny and the Outsiders, is such an iconic and important death that it was difficult. It was definitely an experience. We wanted to make sure that this show was done very honestly and very real.
Sometimes being honest is the hardest thing to do, especially when you're on stage and there's hundreds of people watching and you want to do it right.
Handling something as delicately as supporting your friend as he's dying.
One of the most difficult times of anyone's life, which is the end of it, especially when you're only 16.
Dallas essentially is Johnny's parental guidance. He's his mentor. He sees himself in Johnny, and that's why he's so destroyed and distraught when Johnny passes away. He loves Johnny so much, and he wants to do something so much, but in this instance, there's not much he can do.
It was one of the most satisfying feelings when you guys got to see the show I Died, and you could hear a pin drop, and then Dallas has this whole speech about Dallas can't handle it.
And that's hopefully what the play does for people. They look at me and they see how Dallas reacts to Johnny, and then they almost feel bad for both of us, and they want to be there to help.
You guys were there with us, and that was so rewarding. It beat out any of the difficulties or any of the weirdness that it could have been.
7th grade, I read the book The Outsiders. I loved this book so much because it's a true brotherhood. And not just between the 3 brothers, but between the whole gang. How they always stuck together. During my first rehearsal, the actors portrayed these characters just how I wanted it to be. but by the end of the rehearsals, they portrayed it even better. Johnny is this uptight, scared kid, but Zach showed even a little humor in him. It shows that even at the end of the darkest tunnel, there's still that light. And Ponyboy is one of the most emotional characters in this book, and this is why I love him so much. And Peter showed me some of the most emotional scenes that I've ever seen. Being a 16-year-old young minor, working with all these young adults, has really made me feel included. And sometimes even after the shows, I would go out to eat with them and talk about my life. The actors that played these characters made my perspective of the outsiders 10 times better, and this is why I love it.